Welcome, everyone. This is Magic and Mountains,
the T.A. Barron podcast.
Hi, Isabel.
How are you doing?
I'm fine, and how are you?
Good, thank you.
Are you well? Are you thriving? And most importantly, are you getting enough chocolate?
I'm getting enough chocolate and I'm still writing, so that's good. What about you?
I know. I just read a wonderful new book here called Violeta.
Oh, Violeta. Yeah, oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
I am doing well despite the fact the world is a ghastly mess. But I try to get out in nature. And fortunately, where we live, there's lots of it. And for me, there's nothing else in the world big enough to hold it all than Mother Nature. Well, Isabel Allende is one of the world's most beloved writers, storytellers ever in history. Yes, you are, Isabel.
Thank you.
And for excellent reasons. Life without your books would just be so much less rich and deep and full and inspiring and heartbreaking and true and funny and sexy and in
Thank you, my
in
God.
every way you've enriched all of our lives. And if I listed all your honors, honestly, it would take this entire podcast. So I'm just going to pick a few.
Just skip them, and let's get to the conversation.
All right, it's a deal.
Yeah.
Let me just say that with all of your books and all of your honors and 70 or 80 million copies of your books out worldwide, what's most important to me is not any of that. It's that you are a deeply wise observer of humanity and our human condition. And having watched you over the years and listened to you, I feel even more thrilled about that because you've shown us ways to see ourselves. You have this wonderful X-ray vision about who we really are. And at the same time, you are a hilarious storyteller. We're going to get to my favorite of your funny stories in a moment. And I will add, you're just a fabulous guide to chocolate, having introduced me to the best cup of hot chocolate in the world, as well as the Rakuti chocolates in San Francisco.
Oh, you haven't tried the ones that are filled with orange.
Those I'm there.
To die for.
I'm going to order a box right after this conversation.
Yeah.
Well, Isabel, I have been dying to ask you. Your books are just so full of passion and joy and heartbreak. Why do you tell stories? What is it that compels you to share these wondrous, unforgettable stories?
This is the only thing I can do, Tom. Really. It's the person I am. When we talk right now, I'm thinking of your story. Mm-hmm. So I think in terms of stories. Everything for me is a story. Let's say that we watch some car crash in the street. You will come home and say, well, we saw a car crash. For me, it's a story. Who was in the car? Why? What happened? What was that person thinking? What will happen after? Maybe she borrowed the car and she will get in terrible trouble. That kind of stuff,
Yes.
you know. My brain is just sick. It works that way.
It's a good sickness. I know it's a burden for you too, because there's nothing harder work than writing. But there's also such beauty and joy in sharing and depth in telling the kind of stories you tell.
But also, Tom, I listen and everybody has a story. Everybody has something to say that is wonderful.
Yes.
And that if you share it, another person connects. And in the storytelling, there is connection.
That's beautiful, isn't it? To be part of that world of connecting through stories, but you're honoring each person, no matter how invisible or disadvantaged or overlooked they might be in the world. They have a very powerful story, and so many of your books feature exactly those people, those incredible strong women in particular, in all of the books, Clara and Alba and Transito Soto, of course, and then Eliza and Ines and Eveluna and now Violeta. And I'm just so thrilled. All of these are people whose stories are immensely powerful, but may not have been told ever until you turned your listeners' ear on
But
them.
those are the best stories. The stories of people who are not protected by the big umbrella of the establishment.
Yes.
Who are the marginals,
Yes.
the unheard, the silenced voices. They have the wonderful stories. They're the stories of survival,
Yeah.
of very often of forgiveness, of starting again and just put aside the grudges and the pain and the sorrow and just keep going. I am involved right now with a book that you have to read, and I'm going to send it to you, called Solito. And this book is written by Javier Zamora, a young 32-year-old man today, but he was a 9-year-old boy who crossed the border alone.
Wow.
When he was 9, and he was deported twice and finally reunited with his parents. He went to Harvard with a scholarship. This man is a wonderful writer. And that story, the story of a boy who is a total marginalized, poor child from El Salvador, that makes it in life, that's the story I want.
Yes.
I don't want the story of the privileged people who have everything.
No. And in fact, it's those stories of people who really, truly start with nothing and climb their mountains are the ones that remind us truly of our own capacity for courage or compassion or perseverance, hope, all of those qualities.
I think really, Tom, that we don't know who we are or what strengths we have until we are tested. And sooner or later, life tests you.
Yes.
And it's happening probably right now to you as it has happened to me.
Yes.
And then you realize who you are. What are your values? Can you live to those values?
Yes.
And that's the moment of truth.
Right. And are they just spoken values or are they real?
Exactly.
And if they are real, they will not only guide you, but they will deepen in the course of that difficult time.
And make you much stronger.
Yeah. Isabel, did you always, as a child, love stories?
Yes. I grew up reading. Remember, I'm 80, Tom.
No way.
So
no chance.
Yes.
You're just so wonderfully youthful in so many ways.
I'm so proud to be 80. I'm so happy to be 80. But I was born in 1942, in the end of the world, in a very Catholic, patriarchal, authoritarian, male chauvinistic family, where girls were supposed to be trained to be wives and somebody's mother. So I grew up in a house where there was no television because television didn't exist in Chile yet. My grandfather forbade the radio because it brought vulgar ideas to the house. We never went to the movies. That was, unthinkable. So I grew up reading. And stories, that filled my childhood and my youth.
And you inhaled those stories. And as you talk about in The Soul of a Woman, you also saw what was happening to your mother when your father disappeared and she was forced to fend for herself and raise all three of you and provide with no advantages. And as you point out, no voice that could be heard in that society.
What I think that was the huge problem was that she could not support herself. And that made her dependent on somebody else's decisions or will or whatever. Right. First her father, then her brother, then her first husband, then her second husband, and finally me. And my mother was an extraordinary woman like Violeta in the book, but she could not support herself. So when I created the character of Violeta, I wanted to give my mother, because she's inspired by my mother, I want to give her that, the fact that from very young age, as I did, she's economically independent. And there is no feminism without that.
Marvelous. And it's so important. And I want to talk a bit later about your work in the charitable realm and the work you do for women and girls worldwide. But this is all reminding me of your famous quote, "If I haven't written about it, I haven't lived it."
Yeah. I forget life. I forget life. Tom, I wrote a letter to my mother every single day for decades, until she died. The last letter that we exchanged was the same day that she had the hemorrhage and she died. And so I have in my garage 24,000 letters between her letters and my letters for a lifetime of letters. And every day at the end of the day, I would write to my mom. And in a way, I would summarize the day. Not only what I did, but the intentions, the writing, the thoughts, the dreams, everything was in there. And so if you ask me today, what happened, let's say, on July 15th, 1987, I go to the garage, I take out the box of 1987, look for the date, and I can tell you exactly what happened that day. So it's not lost. And now I don't have that.
I must ask you, do you still write to her in your heart every day?
I tried after she died. I wrote to her for like 2 months. And then it was so artificial, it didn't work.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't real.
No. So what I do now is that every morning I wake up really early, around 4:30, maybe 5 o'clock in the morning. And I have like half an hour in which I just sit there with my cup of coffee and my 2 dogs in the darkness, being grateful and connecting with my mother, with Paula, with other people who are in my memory and in my heart. And that's my beginning of the day.
We're parallel in that way.
You do the
I must
same?
say, I do a gratitude blessing time every day.
At what time do you do it?
I do it not immediately when I wake up in the dark. I do it after breakfast, the first thing I do. I go outside too. I feel the wind on my face and I look up at the trees, whether they have leaves or not. And I just feel life in nature and life in myself. And it helps me. And I roll through in my mind the people in my life I'm so grateful for, my wife and my children and the dear friends and the opportunity to do meaningful work that seems to touch people. And all of those things I feel grateful for. And it puts me in a place of centeredness and gratitude for the rest of the day, even through the hardest parts of the day. It helps. I have to ask you, I remember so vividly once you described your writing process as lighting a candle and writing by that candle light until it burns out. And whether or not you actually light a candle every day is not the point. It's that metaphor I felt was so beautiful because it was welcoming in the darkness and the light and the vulnerability and the transience of all of our lives. Do you still do that as you write?
I do that. The candle that I use now lasts for a week. So it's not...
That would be
it's not
a long stint.
It lasts at least a week because it comes in a pot, And but I do light the candle because it's my way of saying, come on, to the muse, to the inspiration, to light. I always think that a story hides in a dark room. And I go in with my candle and I can illuminate parts of the room, a little corner here and there, and slowly the characters and the story emerges from the darkness. I mean, day by day, word by word. And that's the way it happens. And I cannot do it any faster. I cannot control it, really. It has to happen in a very organic way. That's why I don't have a script. I start writing and I have no idea what I'm doing, except when I'm writing a historical novel. And then I know the time and the place, nothing else. I don't have the characters, I don't have the story, but I have the theater where the characters will act.
So when The Daughter of Fortune is set in early San Francisco, and of course before that, the journey there, you knew the historical bookends of that.
Yeah, I knew the gold rush.
and you knew the gold rush, but the rest just flowed out of those dark corners of
absolutely,
the room.
Absolutely. And sometimes you are in the most unexpected way, the universe gives you something to get started or something that you can develop. For example, I remember that I was going to write about the gold rush, and I wanted to write from the point of view of a woman, but I didn't want a prostitute, which was what was most common at the beginning of the gold rush in California.
Right.
And also an immigrant, because immigrants were the first ones to be here.
Yes.
And I was thinking about this when suddenly I stumbled upon the character of Joaquin Murrieta, the bandit, the California bandit. And it said, like a footnote, that he was maybe a character that never existed, just a legend. And he would have been Mexican or Chilean. And I thought, wow, this is it. I have a Joaquin Murrieta that is Chilean.
So was Eliza inspired then by...
So how could I bring a girl to the gold rush if she doesn't come for gold and if she's not a prostitute? She would come for love. Only.
Yes.
Only for love. And the harrowing trip that she does, it's only because she's so madly in love with this Joaquin that we don't know if it's Joaquin Murrieta or not. You know, I just got a letter yesterday from a young person, 27 years old, that says she has been obsessed to find. She has been obsessed for years because she needs to know if the head of Joaquin Murrieta was what Eliza sees or not. Because at the end of the book, it's an open ending. She comes, looks at the head, and the reader doesn't know if she recognizes the head or not.
Right. Right. You let the reader decide.
Yeah.
All of us are in agony in that moment. You have to know. You've inflicted great pain and agony on every one of us. Can I go back to the candle for a moment? Because what also strikes me about that tradition of yours is that you're opening the door to the mystery of this process, the mystery of creativity, the mystery of storytelling. You're inviting in those elements that we can't even describe, that really make stories come alive and touch human hearts everywhere, in every language, in every culture. It's beautiful.
Well, thank you. But as I said before, I listen to many stories, and then in the process of writing, some of the stories come out of the woodwork. Some of the stories that I had no idea that I remembered suddenly come back. And they become part of the story somehow.
Are these characters fully formed when they emerge from the shadows?
No. They are, I would say, in a mist. And slowly that mist or that fog clears. But it takes a process. Very seldom I see the character clearly. It happened with Island Beneath the Sea. The slave, Sarité, in that book really came to me full-bodied. And I had nothing in common with that woman, and I saw her from her back. And she was dressed in white, a tall African woman with very short hair and a very long neck. And I saw her from behind, and I knew her suddenly. And I have looked for that name or for a character like that in real life because I had the impression, I thought, that she was like a visitation, that someone who had really lived, who came to me and said, tell my story.
I know.
That sometimes happens. Seldom, unfortunately, but that happens.
Well, you really know and convey in your books that there are many different dimensions
of reality.
To reality.
Yes.
And many of them we can never understand, but we can just experience a bit of their ambiance or just a little puff of breeze from one of them, you know. But they're there nonetheless. So, Isabel, how do you bring those characters fully to life? Is there a conversation that you have with them?
You know, I think that what really helps me is that I had a brief but very intense time in the theater. So I wrote theater plays for a company in Chile in the 70s. And the first time I wrote a play, the actors sat around a table to read each one their part. And they all sounded like me. I mean, everybody sounded like me. So I felt so embarrassed. And I picked up all my papers, went back home, and rewrote the whole thing by becoming the actor that reads it. So if I am, let's say, a student, I have to talk like a student, I have to live like a student, I have to be the student in order to create the character for the actor to play that role.
Yes.
So when I write, not with the secondary characters often, but with at least with the protagonists, I have to be them, even if it's the villain. If it's the villain that is going to torture someone, I have to become that person and see why I'm doing it. What do I feel? What was my background? What was my childhood? What do I eat for breakfast? All that is part.
And where does this cruelty come from?
Where does it come from?
Find that.
Yeah. And I don't have to like the character, but I have to be the character at a certain point. That helps a lot.
Well said. I have to ask you an impossible question. Do you have a favorite character across all of your stories?
You know, I always say it's Clara because she was my grandmother. But more and more, I like other female characters that are more assertive, that are more independent and stronger. Clara was a very spiritual creature. My grandmother was. But she was, first of all, dependent. She had never heard of feminism, of course. And she could live that ethereal life because she had a husband who supported every whim of hers. Yeah.
Yes.
So now, for example, I prefer characters like Violeta because Violeta is a full woman of this time.
Yes. Or Eliza or
Ines, who fight for their lives, you know.
Yes. And in the backdrop of these cataclysmic world-changing events, too. How you bring all that together, I don't know how you do that. That's wizardry with words in my view, but it's so beautiful, so powerful.
Thank you.
There's also a touch of that magical side in your books. And I know in your childhood, your grandmother, I believe, was able to be clairvoyant and
she tried.
Maybe she could also do telekinesis and move things on the table.
You know, my grandmother died when I was very young, but there is all kinds of legends about her. And I grew up listening to all these anecdotes that were very magical. So partly the time that I shared with her, but mostly everything I have heard about her, created this character in my mind that was this magical grandmother who, for example, she would say that there are many dimensions of reality and the world is full of presences, the presences of everybody that lived before and will live in the future. Everything comes together in an eternal present. And that idea that we are surrounded by everything that happened and will happen is extraordinary because it gives, first of all, it gives you a sense of fullness, of belonging to something much bigger than your own life and being in the universe, being like stardust.
Yes.
And that is wonderful. And then it takes away all the fear of death, the fear of sorrow, of pain, of all those things. They happen, of course, but you don't fear them because you understand that you are just part of the wind. You are the wind.
Yes, yes. I imagine it as a drop in the great blue sea of all living consciousness.
Yeah, yeah.
You also, by telling stories, though, you open the way for us to imagine those places, those people that we may not see around us, but who are there.
Yeah, and often people have commented that when I describe a scene, they are there. And that's another trick, Tom.
Yeah.
The trick is that I always think of the five senses. So let's say that I am describing the forest. It's not what I see, it's what I smell, what my skin feels, what I hear, what I touch. It's all the senses involved. And I think I got that from the 1001 Nights that I read when I was a teenager. The idea that we are sensory creatures. We are in the world with our senses. And so when I describe a scene in a book, I try to go to all those places. Let's say they are having tea. I need to know what kind of tea. Yeah.
That's right. And then you have to smell it.
I have to smell the tea.
And taste it.
Yeah.
And remember what memories it conjures up to have that smell. You just reminded me of one of my most favorite book events ever was one where you and I did a panel together at Book Passage, that wonderful independent bookstore outside of San Francisco. And we did it in the midst of a travel writers conference. Do you remember?
I remember.
But we did it about traveling to imaginary places.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if the travel writers who were there in the room
were sort of shocked.
Actually, yeah, I think they were like, "What are they talking about? Are we in the Amazon or are we in New York City or where are we?" But you and I were off on
we had fun,
magical journeys. That was so much fun. You also told me I should shave my beard that I was growing that summer.
Yeah, because you have such a beautiful face. Why would you hide it behind a beard? That's crazy, crazy. Yeah.
In this moment of our conversation, I would like to turn, with your permission, from fiction to nonfiction. And I have to start with what to me is the most sad and powerful and at the same time uplifting book I've ever read, which is Paula.
Thank you.
Inside my copy of the book, I have one of your beautiful fabric cards from Chile that you wrote me when you sent me the book. And you wrote, "Paula is a book that saved me from depression and forced me to go inside myself and draw strength from my roots, my past, and the love that I have always had in my life." Love, Isabel, with one of your beautiful flower drawings at the bottom. Now, could you please tell us a bit about the book and the origins and the meaning that it gave to you?
Well, the book, what happened is that my daughter Paula had a condition called porphyria that should not be fatal, but she had a porphyria attack in Spain. She went to the hospital, they gave her the wrong medication, she fell in a coma, they didn't monitor the coma, and she ended up with severe brain damage in a coma. And they hid what had happened in the hospital for 5 months. That I lived in the hospital waiting for her to wake up. When finally they admitted she would never wake up, I managed to bring her all the way from Spain to California. This was before 9/11. And I brought her in a United commercial flight where I took several seats in first class, and I brought a nurse, and I brought all the equipment she needed. Ended up with a connection in Washington, can you believe it?
Wow.
And then I brought her here, and I took care of her at home until she died. Now, the book really started in the hospital in Madrid during those 5 months because I was expecting her to wake up. And people had told me that people who are in a coma for a long time usually have lapses of memory. Sometimes they don't remember anything. So I started writing to remind her who she was and from where she came, and who was I, and her country and everything else.
Yes.
And so I took notes in a notebook during that time. And then I wrote letters to my mother in Chile. When I brought her to California, I knew already that she was never going to wake up, so I stopped writing to her, and I wrote to my mother. At the end of the year, December 2nd, when she died, my mother gave me back all the letters that I had sent her, and she said, "Read them. They are in chronological order, so you will understand that death was the only way out for Paula." This happened in December, and I started on my books on January 8th. So on January 8th, I took all those letters plus the notes that I had taken, and I started writing writing really with tears, a book that I didn't intend to be published. It was just a memoir of the sorrow. And in the process, Tom, of writing that book, I could organize the events. Because for me, the whole year was a black night. The only thing that I remember clearly was the trip, bringing her from Madrid, nothing else. So by reading the letters and remembering stage by stage what had happened, I could organize it in my brain. And in a way, I could frame this, that this pain that occupied all my being, I could contain it in a box, the box of the book, and see that around me my grandchildren were being born, life went on, I had a husband, I had a dog, life kept happening, and the world kept happening also. And so in that sense, the book helped me enormously. When I finished the book, as I told you in that card, I felt that I had been supported by the love of the people that helped me through this whole thing. And then her husband and my parents read the book, Paula's husband, and they said, let's see if this should be published. Paula would like this to be published. Let me tell you, that book was published 30 years ago, and I get letters about it every week.
I bet.
Every week. There's someone new who is reading it. Sometimes it's a very young person. I get letters like, for example, a young person that says, I haven't talked to my mother for 8 years. I read your book and I called her. That kind of letter.
What power in that.
You know what is in the shared sorrow, Tom?
Yes.
When we go through something horrible, our tendency is to close down. And we close down, but if we open up and let all the pain come through and share it, something miraculous happens. You become stronger, people connect with you, people feel stronger because they know that they are not alone in their own pain. So I think that I learned a lot with that experience.
A memoir can be not only deeply moving and inspiring for the readers, it can be a kind of therapy for the writer.
A catharsis, yes. For me it was. Yes, it was.
You know, that's part of what stirs me about the book and why I've read it several times is because you start at a place of such devastation, but you find your way ultimately to a more powerful and stable, wiser, deeper, stronger place. Let me just read to you one of the opening lines in that first chapter. You're writing to Paula. I can imagine you sitting by her bedside there in that hospital. Since you fell ill, I have had no strength for anything but you, Paula. You have been sleeping for a month now. I don't know how to reach you. I call and I call, but your name is lost in the nooks and crannies of this hospital. My soul is choking and saddened. Sadness is a sterile desert. I don't know how to pray. I cannot string together two thoughts, much less immerse myself in creating a new book. I plunge into these pages in an irrational attempt to overcome my terror. Thank you for having the courage to write this.
Thank you for letting it touch your heart, Tom. You know what, Tom? Sometimes we cannot escape. There's no way out. You have to live it. Just go through the pain, and that's the way it is. And we are so terrified of suffering. We are terrified of pain. But there's something very cleansing in pain.
Right. It's true. And you have to walk all the way through it, though, don't you? You can't try to go around it or over it or ignore it, because then it'll come back even more so and worse. This is like someone at the end of a long tunnel out there holding a lamp. I can see that lantern out there. So thank you.
So maybe this is a time for you to write a memoir.
Maybe it is. I love you so much, Isabel. And I'm going to take to heart what you've just said, because I've been thinking about that perhaps this is the time. Well, now I want to turn to a different kind of autobiography, but a more joyful one, I must say. Your book, Aphrodite, also described as a memoir of the senses.
Well, that's the task I gave myself after years of being in a writer's block. I gave myself a task to write something very different from what I had experienced with Paula. And this is a book about lust and gluttony, the only deadly sins that are worth the trouble.
Oh, you must share with my podcast listeners the story about Antonio Banderas, which I think is one of the funniest, most hilarious stories ever told, ever. Please tell us.
Well, I had a dream, and that triggered the book, actually. I had a dream that I placed a naked Antonio Banderas on a Mexican tortilla. I slathered him with guacamole and salsa, rolled him up, and ate him. And so since then, I have had an obsession with Antonio Banderas.
I love that you ate him at the end. And you also, at some point in the book, you talk about a dream of diving into a swimming pool completely filled with rice pudding.
Rice pudding. I love rice pudding, almost as much as chocolate. And I remember that was my comfort food when Paula was in the hospital in Madrid. So the idea of plunging into a swimming pool of rice pudding is fantastic. Can you feel the rice pudding? The little grains in your skin, the sweetness of it.
Soft and creamy all over you, everywhere, filling your mouth, everything.
Yeah.
I'm just, it's stunning how powerful that image is. Well, this book has not only stories like that, but it has some fabulous recipes and all kinds of facts that I had never known about different kinds of fruits and spices and the history of them as aphrodisiacs and marvelous recipes.
Well, don't follow the recipes, because they are not really aphrodisiac. They don't work. If you need an aphrodisiac, take Viagra, because really it's easier than cooking all the stuff that I recommend in the book.
Fortunately, I have the best aphrodisiac, which is
love.
An absolutely wonderful, loving mate in curry. So she would, by the way, come up here and totally look at me in horror if she knew I had just said that. And thousands of people might hear it. Yeah. But it's true.
Good.
I'm a very lucky person to be married to this wonderful gal. And she puts up with me. So
you put up with her. It's mutual. Usually it's mutual.
Isabel, before we wind up, and you've been so generous with your precious time, I do want to ask you to tell us a bit about your marvelous charitable work through your foundation to help women and girls around the world.
Well, after Paula died, I decided to create this foundation to honor her. And the mission of the foundation is to invest in the power of women and girls in the areas of education, and that includes getting a skill so that you can work. Health, which includes also reproductive rights, and protection from violence and exploitation, because most women all over the world are exploited or abused. And so we work with people of high risk, in the most vulnerable, usually the poorest, many immigrants and refugees. And the stories I get are fabulous. The book that I will publish in June is based in one of those stories. So I get back such an incredible treasure of lives that I can touch and that I can learn from. The person who runs the foundation is my daughter-in-law, who does a fabulous job. So she's always in a plane. She just came back from India. Before she had been in Fiji and Nepal, and now she's going to Kenya. So she supervises the projects that we finance. And without a person like Lori, I couldn't possibly do the work we do. You need someone that is like a saint, totally dedicated to this.
Yes.
But it works fabulously, and I am very grateful that we can do that.
I feel the same about our Foundation for Heroic Young People, and I'm blessed with one person, a former elementary school teacher who's totally that saint, and she's dedicated. Her name is Barbara Ann, and it makes it all happen.
Yes.
But there are very few ways, I think, to lift the world as powerful as helping girls and women on whatever continent, or young people, wherever they are, so that they can remember that they do have power, and they can then not just help themselves, but these girls, these young people, they go help their communities.
Absolutely.
Their countries.
You know, it has been proven that every cent that you invest in women comes back multiplied. Because
Yes.
women, when they get any kind of help, they invest it completely in the family. For example, in a poor community, they will buy 2 goats. And from the 2 goats, they will have 4 goats. And then they will come out of extreme poverty. And if the family comes out of extreme poverty, usually the community eventually does, the village, and then the nation. The most backward and poorest nations in the world are where women are put down. That's happening today
Yes.
in Afghanistan, for example, where the situation, it's dire. I mean, it's just awful. And women are less than cattle. On the other hand, women educated and connected among themselves become such a powerful, strong political element
Yes.
that can change a country also.
Yes.
Look, I tell Lori sometimes, Lori, I'm so discouraged because what we can do is like a drop of water in a desert of need. And Lori
Yes.
always says it's not about numbers. It's about the person you can touch and whose life you can change. And that's enough.
That's the best we can
That's
do.
the best you can do.
And Lori's right. And bless her for saying that. It's so important to do what we can while we can, however small it may seem in the scale of the problems.
Yeah.
Isabel, I have so delighted every single millisecond of talking with you.
Thank you, Tom. It's been wonderful to see you also.
I really want to thank you and congratulate you on 80 fabulous years. And let us hope another 80 to come. And I really want to say to all of my listeners out there, I passionately urge you to check out the books of Isabel Allende. Visit them, and you will be thrilled and uplifted and moved and devastated and inspired and fall down in fits of laughter. And then you'll want to visit again and again. They're that special. Thank you, dear Isabel.
Thank you, Tom, and good luck to you.
Thank you. To everyone out there, let me just say thank you so much for joining us for Magic and Mountains. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, may you have magical days.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Magic and Mountains, the T.A. Barron podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information and to find all of T.A.'s books, visit tabarron.com. Have a magical week.